Hello and welcome back to this lecture on government budgets and fiscal policy. Now we're going to look at how fiscal policy affects the economy. And before getting into this, just imagine what we mean by an economy. So if you think about your own life, and in normal times, the number of economic transactions that you get involved in, just buying things from shops or online, and things like renting your accommodation, your family paying for utility bills. Think of the different firms that you deal with, and those firms then all dealing with each other in terms of what they're going to sell, what they're going to buy, their employees, what they're going to invest in for the future, the different markets they're in, their subcontractors. And then think of governments and all the myriad people that work for governments in an economy, the involvement of NGOs, the media, farmers and the decisions that farmers make about how much to grow. Now imagine that for a country with, say, like Ecuador, where there are 17 million people making these kind of decisions on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, both in terms of what they're going to do today and the future, and then scale that up from 17 million, which is already incredibly complicated, all the different things that are done, just from the level of just buying some seed, to buying something for lunch, to paying your mortgage, to investing in a new type of crop, or government procurement for millions of pounds, or big businesses doing things for millions and billions of pounds. 17 million people, I said, in Ecuador, and then scale that up to 200 million. So for Brazil or Nigeria, over 200 million. The complexity becomes mind-boggling of all the different things people are involved in. And then scale up to India and China with over 1 billion each. It's really quite hard to get your head around. So when we say the economy, we're talking about these things of almost incredible complexity, almost unrivaled. I mean, it's like outside of the human brain. It's hard to think of anything as incredibly complex and multidimensional as an economy. And yet we have to find some way of getting our heads around what's going on in these things. So we're going to present some quite simple models, but really it's amazingly powerful the way that just with a few simple ideas you can sort of shepherd these incredibly complicated things into something you can start to wrap your head around a bit. And a lot of the responsibility of this comes down to someone called John Maynard Keynes, a famous economist of the early and mid 20th century, who looked at the complexity of the economy and started to work out ways of categorizing activity and linking these things together that have proved to be very helpful. Whether or not people agree with his precise policies or not, that way of thinking about the economy has proved to be incredibly powerful. So maybe you skip through that bit, but now we'll get into the theory. But bear in mind that what we're trying to do here is to simplify stuff which is incredibly complicated. And really you can do it quite successfully. But bear in mind that underneath these simplifications there is an amazing amount of diversity and complexity. So how does it affect the economy? Well, in order to start thinking about this crazily complex thing, you need to put things into boxes. So remember that in my first couple of lectures here, we're just talking about, most of the time, inside an economy, so not thinking about the external sector. So if you do that, then all the demand for stuff that's produced within an economy, all the gazillions of things that are produced in different ways, goods and services and so on, all of that demand is going to come either from household consumption C, or private investment I, or government expenditure G. And we define these categories as household consumption expenditure is somebody somewhere wants that stuff, who's demanding it because they want to have food or clothes or goods or services. That's one area that stuff can get demanded by. Otherwise, it could be firms and private organisations who need to invest, so new factories, tools, buildings, commercial buildings, etc. Or it can be government expenditure, so the government demanding stuff. So within the country, these are all demand for domestic output is all these things here. So either private households or private organisations or the governments. When you start to think about, as we will, the foreign sector, some of the stuff that's demanded in your economy is being demanded not by people in this economy, but by people in other economies, so exports. So these four categories here are the only ways there are of people demanding the stuff that is produced within our country. You have to bear in mind, though, that some of this demand, some of this C and I and G, instead of demanding stuff that comes from our country, they're demanding stuff from other countries. So could bear in mind that demand's going to imports. So we've got these 5 boxes here which sum up all of those myriad different ways that people have of demanding and wanting things in an economy. So try and get your head around these 5 letters if you can, and remember what they stand for. So now how does this all link together? Well, here's another letter, total expenditure E. So when you consider all the stuff that's produced in an economy, and we'll say that it's in 1 year, you could do it month by month or week by week, we'll say year by year. So in a year, total expenditure on domestic output, and can be given by this way. When we say expenditure, there's 2 ways you can think about expenditure. You can think of it in terms of the economy is just producing stuff. So everybody gets some stuff and then they can swap some of that stuff for what other people are producing. So it could be, the expenditure could be your share of the stuff that's produced in the economy, you swap some of that stuff with what other people are producing, and that's your expenditure. So I'm going to swap you some of my stuff for what you've got. Yeah. So it could be real things, the expenditure, in terms of my share of output I'm spending on some other things to get other people's bit of output, or it could be expenditure in terms of money as a token for represent that. So expenditure can be thought of in terms of money or in terms of you swapping your output. Either way, the stuff that I'm going to give away, so I'll talk in terms of money, say for now, the expenditure in terms of money that I'm going to do is my expenditure on domestic output or input or imports. So here's the overall equation. I think I'm going to produce very few equations in this, and the equations in most of my part of the module are very simple ones, and almost entirely they're no more complex than just splitting things into categories. So it's saying all of expenditure is equal to this box plus this box plus this box. It's not really any kind of complicated mathematics. So this is the kind of the first overall equation for the total expenditure on everything that's produced within an economy comes from these categories over here. And what you can do is, if you prefer to think of it as like this, okay, all the stuff, so this is total expenditure on stuff our economy produces, comes from, it's these boxes. So there's one box is households demanding goods and services, but there's also private organisations and companies that demand things like, you know, tools and factories and so on. So that's not households, that's private companies demanding some of the stuff that's produced. And also, as well as the private households and private companies, there's the government saying, okay, we need a government building, we need some ballot boxes from Venezuela or something, or we need police equipment. So the government also demanding things. But also, some of the stuff that we produce inside our economy is being demanded by people outside the economy. So we have to put plus X plus people outside the economy demanding our stuff as well. So that's part of the expenditure. But also, all this demand here from our households, for investment and government sector, some of that demand doesn't actually go to stuff produced in the domestic economy. It goes to stuff that's produced outside the economy. So the total stuff that's being demanded is all the stuff that we produce plus the stuff that's imported. So all the demand for stuff we produce plus imported stuff comes from households plus private sector companies plus the governments, and plus a bit of demand from other people outside. And that equals E plus M. But this is normally rearranged. So this is the complicated as my maths gets. If you rearrange this equation, take the M to the other side over here. So subtract the M. So if you subtract M from here, subtract M from here, that cancels out. And then you have the thing I started up with there. So let's just remove that bit of ink. Okay. So that's how we get that first equation. Okay. So far we haven't got tax in there. Remember, we're talking about fiscal policy, so we want to have government spending, and government spending we have already got because of G. So the G is our government spending here. But the other side of it is taxation, and that doesn't appear anywhere in that equation. So to get taxation into it, we've got to consider look a little bit more depth at C, consumption. And sometimes people find this that looks like this thing over here looks like a complicated equation. What this actually means, you can read this as, is that C Now that brackets means depends on. C depends on y minus t. And y is the total income in the economy. So total income in the economy is what households have to spend. So when you take away the taxation, that tells you how much people might have got left after they've been taxed. So, and they decide how much they're going to consume based on that, what money they've got left after taxation. So C depends on this, which is income left after tax. So consumption depends on income left after tax is what this part here is saying. Okay, let me just remove that bit of scribble and get back to the official slides. So now we've got both the T and the G in there. So at the top part, the G at the top is the fiscal, is the government spending. So that's the bit we affect by government spending. So G can be increased or decreased. The government can spend more or less. The other side of fiscal policy is that T can be increased or decreased. And that shows how fiscal policy can affect that E, which is the demand for domestic output. Because remember, demand is what we think drives these short-term booms and busts. So fiscal policy works on demand in these two ways. And I've emphasized the G and the T in green. So why it's flashing like that. So if I boost up G, that's going to increase demand, so increase E. So I'm going to increase demand in the economy. If I slash G by defunding the police, for example, that effect would decrease demand and decrease E in the short term. With T, if I boost up T here, it's going to have the opposite effect. And this is the tricky thing with taxation, is that it kind of has the opposite effect. You increase taxation, that decreases demand, because increasing taxation here leaves people with less money. And so because C depends on how much money they have left, if you leave them with less money, they're going to consume less. So increasing T was going to decrease C, which decreases E. Or you can slash T to reduce taxes, which leaves people with more money, increases consumption and increases E. So more G means more demand, more T means less demand. So those are the main levers of fiscal policy. Now, in the next little video, we'll go on to this, the simplest of the models I'm going to present. I think I present 3 models of the macroeconomy. The simplest is the Keynesian cross or Keynesian cross, but I'll leave that for the next video so this one doesn't get too long. For now, thanks for watching.